Welcome to the first episode of Picture This with a guest. And I'm happy to welcome Lisa Rogers, who is the author of Beautiful Noise, Joan Mitchell, which I can't wait to hear more about, as well as several little golden books. You were a Crystal Kite finalist, all kinds of awards, and several books out this year. I'm very happy to bring Lisa Rogers on.
Thanks so much for having me, Adam. I'm so excited to meet you and talk with you. And as a library teacher, I had your books in my library and they were irresistible ones. So thanks for writing them.
Well, that's awesome. So the whole point of what I'm trying to do with Picture This is I'm trying to take my love of using books for things other than just reading and try to bring those concepts to the classroom. So hopefully educators and librarians and parents will get some things out of these podcasts that give them some ideas, some different ideas of ways that you can incorporate picture books into a curriculum. And I've used my books, I'm sure you have as well, for kindergarten through adult to illustrate points and talk about things other than just reading and writing. So without any further ado, let's talk a little bit about what brought you to writing and why you were drawn towards the nonfiction as opposed to what I call also nonfiction, but it's all made up nonfiction.
Okay. So I was a daydreamy kind of child, and
Excellent.
I had a lot of poetry books, folk tales, fairy tales from all over in the house, and also encyclopedias. And anytime there was some movie on, my mom would say, "Oh, let's look up this concept related to this movie or to this documentary." And so it was always, nonfiction was always something that I was interested in. I always wanted to know things. And of course, without a computer at that time, we lived on the Jersey Shore and there were no real bookstores there.
Yeah.
We went to the library a lot, and I just kind of lived in the world of books, and I dreamed that I might write something or draw something. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a writer. I just had these daydreamy thoughts in my head, and I wasn't the most practical kind of person. My dad was an engineer. My sisters all wanted to do very concrete things. One's a lawyer, one's an accountant, one's a nurse. And I'm thinking, where do I fit in with these people who have these big goals? And I just kind of listened and soaked in things. And that's kind of how it was just part of me. I had no idea how to become a writer. I did not enjoy school, even though I was good at school. And I majored in English. Everyone said, "Oh, well, you can do anything with your English degree." What can I do that is not being a teacher? I became a newspaper reporter, and then somehow I fell into teaching, and I absolutely loved being a library teacher for more than 20 years. It was just the best job. And that's really what led me to writing children's books.
Am I right that there was, I think I saw this somewhere, there was a unique library in your town that you would go to?
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I love going to the library. My wife's a bit of a germaphobe, so she doesn't understand, going and checking out books that other people have touched. But I love going to the library and just, it's like going to a bookstore, except all the books there are free.
Right. And there's a special spot, right, to discover them. In a bookstore, it might be very busy, in a library too, but you can always find a little corner in a library and sort of settle down and look at a book. We lived in a really small town. I think the population was 4,000, something like that. And our library was in an old kind of Tudorish building over the police station.
Oh, very cool.
So there was this kind of cool winding staircase that led up to the library. And at the landing, there was a stained glass window and there was a row of Beatrix Potter books. So that was special. And then my mother ended up working at that library. And so she would just bring home lots and lots and lots of books for me, which was the best thing.
All right. Reading, writing, you write a story, you read a book. Those are great skills, those are the logical skills you would use to teach with books. But what were some of the more fun and interesting ways that you connected your students?
So in my school library, I don't remember ever checking out a book. It was a forbidding place to be. It was so neat, right? So I wanted my students to feel really comfortable in the library, and I wanted them to really interact with books, not just have me read to them, but we would discuss books the whole way through if we were reading. How did the author make this choice? What's happening here? What would you do if you were this character? What do you think is going to happen next? All those sort of critical thinking skills I wanted to build, and I wanted them to just kind of be in the book. Sometimes they would say, can we just finish the book? So, okay, yes, we can just finish the book, but we still need to talk about it. So we did a lot of discussion around books and a lot of exploration of books in the library. So I just wrote a blog post for Melissa Stewart on something that I did where I wanted to connect my students to nonfiction more. When I first started, I noticed that kids in K through 2 love taking out nonfiction books. And then after that, they really didn't. So I wondered what happened. And that was actually my research for my Master of Library Science that I did. So I did a study on that. I looked at teachers' classrooms. I looked at collections. I looked at what they use for read alouds. And I looked at statistics for what kids checked out. And I did a survey on their choices. So I wanted to build interest in nonfiction, obviously, because that's what builds background knowledge for reading fiction. You have to understand what you're reading, and it also builds vocabulary. And, these kids are going to grow up to be all sorts of people. So let's introduce them to all sorts of ideas, science, history, inventors. Biography was something that I love to share with students. And of course, I started writing biographies probably because of that. So for the nonfiction study, I would sometimes just take out a whole bunch of nonfiction books and spread them on the rug, and kids would come in and they could sit down and just open them up and look at them and share them with other kids. And it was great. I mean, just so fun to see them opening books, because on the shelf, you just see the spines, right? So sometimes you're reluctant to take a book off the shelf or take a book off a display even. Oh, can I take this book from the shelf? Yes, of course. That's why it's there face out for you. So encouraging kids to just explore in the library without any limitation on what they could choose, what they could read, was really key, I think, for me. That's what I wanted to do.
One of the reasons that I'm happy that to have you as my first guest is there's a natural way to bridge nonfiction into other classroom activities. And we're going to start. Joan Mitchell is just such a wonderful artist. And I know you've got the book behind you. I connect nonfiction to activity, right? So like when I'm an art teacher, I'll have all kinds of art books in my classroom. Seeing that and seeing an artist or a musician, or I know you have one coming out this year about an amazing author, and seeing more than just their story, kind of getting into the process. How, as a librarian, would you connect your readers to one of your books in a way that makes them take it outside of just the text?
Sure. So for Joan Mitchell Paints a Symphony, one great activity would be for students to mine their emotions and memories like Joan Mitchell did and create either a piece of art. They could create a poem. They could create a musical composition. She loved poetry. She loved music. She loved dogs, which is always a good thing. And, you can use her technique for creating something meaningful to her and bring that to any art form. So poetry, painting, music. That's how you create a unique invention, right? That's how you create unique art, by using your own feelings, your own emotions. And I always wondered how people became who they became. And really, I think that's the key. You have to learn who you are and not be afraid to bring who you are to your work. And that's what Joan Mitchell did. She created these gargantuan paintings that were beautiful. She didn't want to copy nature because nature is already gorgeous. Why create a realistic picture when really what she had to bring was her emotions and memories? And so therefore, for kids, I would have them think of a place that they loved, like Joan Mitchell did when she created this series of this Imagined Valley. Think of a place you love, put yourself in there in your mind. What do you see in your mind? Write it down. What's happening? What do you smell? Use all of your senses. And then you can create a poem. You can create colors to go with your memories and emotions. You can attach colors to certain things that you've seen or imagine. And you could create certain notes, right? Or passages of notes to go with those memories and create something. So for Beautiful Noise, the music of John Cage, I have a similar activity where you can create a musical composition based on making your own instruments and your own sounds.
Oh, that's awesome. And do you have these as part of a teacher's guide or something that can link to? And
Beautiful Noise, if people sign up for my newsletter at lisarogerswrites.com, you'll automatically get this activity kit that I created for Beautiful Noise. And I am creating one for Joan Mitchell Paints a Symphony. But that activity that I just shared, just see, it's called Riding a Bike with No Hands, using sensory imagery to infuse writing with emotion. And so I use that technique of mining the senses to create something. For my first book, 16 Words, William Carlos Williams and the Red Wheelbarrow, I had kids make mental images, which is what I did a lot as a teacher. I would give children poems and they would create their own images, and we would look at them together and see how we each bring something different when we use our own imaginations to create a scene. So for 16 Words, you could think about how many chickens do you see in the yard in that 16-word poem, right? How hard is it raining? What color is the wheelbarrow? Is it weathered? Is it bright red? What color is that red wheelbarrow? And where is it? So there's so many things and then you could create your own 16-word poem. I also have an activity guide for that. So I just feel like the possibilities are endless as long as you, base it in something that they can do. You make it scalable depending on the grade level.
Yep.
And you give them options. So
yeah, and that's really key, right? So there is a scalability that needs to be inherent in any of the activities that we're discussing here, because we want, as authors, and again, as people who, really want people to appreciate these books, we want people to be able to bring them into a classroom of first graders, a classroom of fifth graders, a classroom of high school students. And there's a stigma. Like you were saying, you did some research on what is the stigma about people not reading nonfiction as they grow older. And I really got into nonfiction when I was like high school and college. I poured through it, and I still read nonfiction all the time. Biographies and, self-help books and all kinds of weird stuff like that, just to see, what people are saying and connect to the world around us. But that same stigma sticks to picture books. Picture books are for little kids, but they're not, right? So the medium of writing a picture book is different than writing a chapter book or, longer form. And I've written a couple of longer form books. I think the longest one I've had published so far is 10,000 words. My next longest published book is 450 words. So one of the things that I've found is that with longer form writing, you have the ability to make it muddy and still have your ideas brought out. But if you have a picture book, it has to be really clean. It has to be very understandable, and it has to be very focused, which makes for a good lesson plan, right? So if I'm teaching writing to high school students, I could use War and Peace, which is very well written, or I can use a picture book, which also can be very well written and very focused and show all of the same things without the extra fluff.
Exactly. The writing has to be perfect, right? The word choice is key. We're not repeating any words in that book. We are showing what's happening. We are eliciting emotions. We are showing actions, and we're trying to touch the reader's heart with our words. And I think that's one reason why I don't have a lot of patience with reading adult fiction books, because they are too messy. They are too messy. The reason that you can use picture books up through high school and with adults is because we don't talk down to our readers, right? Kids are really smart people. They are really perceptive people. There were so many times when I would be sharing a book with a student and they would point out something that I had not noticed, and they make it their own. So, of course, there are things that they're not going to understand, and you can explain those to them, but there's no reason to dumb down a concept. They understand. And I tried to make my lessons so doable and so interesting for them. So I use other things like Douglas Florian's poetry, so clever, and Leslie Bouillon's poetry. I connected them with the insect unit in our third grade classroom. So they wrote fact-based insect poems. They did research on insects. They chose an insect. They created a print for their insect. We printed them on paper bags, just like Douglas Florian did, and pasted their poems next to them. And then, of course, they got to read their poems, and I videoed them. And, performance is another thing that I had students do, and it's so easy to do with picture books or poetry. Building those public speaking skills in library was another goal of mine too. And they loved doing that. So, right, when we are sharing our books, you can't just read a book, you have to perform the book. Think of Ashley Bryan and the way he performed poetry. So I wanted my students to understand through that word choices make a difference. They're really paying attention to the words as they're performing these books. So that's another thing that you could do with picture books. Students could choose 2 pages out of Joan Mitchell Paints a Symphony and perform them. And you could have them, different kids, choose different pages and perform them. Or you could look to see how different one person might express a word and another person. So it's kind of endless possibilities. You just have to think outside of the box.
We both know from being around educators a lot, they do, right? I don't think we're reinventing the wheel, but I think if we can put pre-made things that are easy to find and easy to reach in front of them, so they don't have to create all of that themselves. Like, there's so much that you have to do as an educator that as authors or as creators, if we can take a little bit of time and say, look, we're going to put some things out there, you're welcome to use them or not use them, but just some different ways, out of the box ideas, and maybe you use it, or maybe it gives you an idea for something, a place to go with your stories or with your classroom activities that you weren't thinking of before.
Exactly. I think it makes so much sense to have that teacher in mind when you're creating those activities, and not just have a word search or something simple like that. Something that is going to extend the book into something meaningful in your classroom, because, as you say, teachers' lives are very difficult. Teaching is an incredible responsibility, and it's daunting. You have to be able to reach every learner in your classroom, and picture books are a wonderful way to do that. And now, I mean, the wonderful thing now, I think that is we have so many great nonfiction picture books for their units on science and on history. It's fantastic, not the types of books that were available when I first started teaching.
So this is the part where I call it Adam's book bag. Okay. And we're going to talk about one book that you like fell in love with and would go back to for lessons, right? For me, I would say a book that I bring up all the time, especially with younger kids when I'm doing presentations to kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. I talk about Where the Wild Things Are. And the thing for me about this book, when I talk about creating a character, right? And every time I go and do a presentation, what we do is we create two characters. And I talk about you really only need two things to create a character, right? You need them to have something to want, right? I want this. And then you have to give them something that they really need that's different than what they want. And the illustration of this is our main character, Max, gets sent to his room without dinner. And meanwhile, he's like, I kind of just like, I really want to be somewhere where there's no consequences for me having fun. And he goes there and he has such a good time and is so good at doing things with no consequences that they crown him king of the land with no consequences. And then I turn to the kids and I say, so he was happy and he stayed, the end, right? They all say no. And then it's why? It's because what he wanted wasn't what he needed, right? And what he truly needed is to remember he's loved, even if you're in trouble, he's loved. And it's shown when he gets home and his dinner is still hot, right? So the play off of what they want and what they need is really how you create characters. Or you give them something to want and you take it away from them, right? Or you give them something to want and you make it difficult for them to get, right? So it's very, very simple to create that. And I use that book as kind of the way of describing that and explaining it. The same way when my kids were growing up, I was like, you want candy, but you need to eat vegetables, right? So it's that kind of play. So what kind of book does that for you? And what kind of little lesson did you build around it?
So I like to do lessons on revision and word choice. And I'll use books like Watercress, where there's very strong imagery. I'll also use this book called 12 Kinds of Ice by Ellen Bryan Obed, which is anticipation of the time when you're able to skate. And the word choices are just so beautiful. The imagery is gorgeous. And so that's one thing that I do with kids. So look out the window. What do you see? Thinking of how I started 16 Words about William Carlos Williams. So do you see a bird flying? Okay, so how else can you describe that bird? What kind of juicy words can you use? And what is the difference between reading a book that says the bird was flying or reading the bird soared in the sky or plummeted down into the pond and snatched a fish? It's huge. So those are the kinds of lessons that I do when I do school visits. So there's not just one book. I usually have a whole panoply of books.
It's amazing how a simple sentence, the bird blank, right? The bird soared, the bird dove, the bird splashed. Each verb that you put in there tells a completely different story. And that kind of revision and that kind of specificity, it really is a fun exercise to play with.
It's great. And they can create a poem right there on the spot with the words that they chose. They can bump up their own writing. I did a lesson visit last year with grade 3, and I was just so amazed. After our lesson, they ran right to their stories that they had prepared, and they were crossing things out and writing new words. And I just was amazed how excited they were to really bump up their work. They really wanted their work to be good, and they were so proud of themselves. And I was so proud of them. It's just wonderful. So that's one way.
All right, so that was the book bag. The next thing that we have here called Story Sparks. And this is just a prompt or like a 1-sentence thing, or 2 sentences that for teachers to spark student engagement, right? And we kind of hit a couple of these when we were talking about Joan Mitchell and things like that. But what is a key, 1 thing or 2 things that you think can help push kids to be more engaged in some of these fun activities that we're talking about?
Sure. So one thing I like to do is, if I was reading a biography, I would ask the kids to think about whether their lives had been affected in any way by what this person did. So Vivian Kirkfield has just come out with a book called One Girl's Voice, How Lucy Stone Helped Change the Law of the Land. So Lucy Stone was an abolitionist. She was a women's rights pioneer. So after reading something like that, you could ask your students, well, how has your life been affected by what Lucy Stone started? What would it be like if Lucy Stone hadn't done what she did and others like her, right? So think about how these people relate to you, because they're not just like people who we should know and admire, but they change the world for us. Beth Anderson has this great new book called Hiding in Plain Sight. Kate Warren and the Race to Save Abraham Lincoln. It is so compelling. Oh my goodness, I love this book so much. And so Kate Warren was the first female detective for the Pinkerton Agency, and she protected Abraham Lincoln on the way to his inauguration. So there was a plot to kill his life, and she foiled that plot. So how might you have reacted if you were Kate Warren and you were tasked with that same job?
Trying to make things personal, which pretty much all of my books are flights of fancy. But I think, especially with a book like Warning, Do Not Open This Book, where you make the reader part of the story, or even more so, the person they're reading it to becomes part of the book, part of the story. Engaging your audience with think about yourself as this person, I think, is a really, really good way to draw them in and make them more get them more amped up for the story or the activity that comes after the story.
Sure. That's interesting that you say that, because I think that's why I wrote Beautiful Noise, the music of John Cage, in second person, because John Cage had so many interests. There's so much that he did. How do I explore this book with young readers? How do I explain it to young readers? And I wrote it so many different ways, but then I just started as, what if all the music, all the sounds you heard sounded to you like music? And so it just brings the reader right into the story. And the question is right there. Why don't you answer that question? What would the world be like if everything you heard, your dog barking, sounded to you like music? Which it does.
Some of those things are amazing, like people that see colors with music. When somebody talks, that's music. So they're like, you talk in purple. It's a very
awesome.
It's like an interesting thing to kind of envision. And if you're, if you have a group of people, say, like, listen to me talk. What color are my words to you? Right? Listen to this story. Is it a red story, a blue story, a pink story, a green story? And how do you see the story you're hearing and engage them that way? That's another really fun kind of activity.
That's a great activity. In fact, I just interviewed an artist as part of my launch for the Joan Mitchell book, and she said that when she reads, the words are in different colors, and it's just a constant. It's constant. And so that translates into her artwork as well. But, I love, your book, do not open this book, right? Because it addresses something, just the cover of it addresses something that I found as a teacher, that sometimes kids are afraid to open a book because they don't know how it's going to turn out. And they want to trust us as writers and us as teachers, right? That we are going to take care of them through this story, and that we are going to support them and respect them. So, because students have to have that trust in their teachers to guide them in that way. So I love that, you have, do not open this book, and this is a good story, and I will not eat you, because you're sort of addressing that head on. It's a brave thing to open a book and to turn each page.
It is. Every book is an adventure. I've been dealing a lot with Alice's Adventures in Wonderland recently, looking at that as kind of a backbone for something that I'm working on. And I never really consider the reader, like the end reader. I consider myself as a reader when I'm writing a story. Like, what is a book that I would like to read? Or what is a book that I would like to read to somebody? And I try to write those kind of books. But that brings up an interesting kind of thing, right? So one of the features that I have come up with is the Librarian's Corner. And as a librarian, I think this is a perfect thing to bring up with you. But in thinking about impactful collections of books and diverse topics and themes, what are some things that you either used as a librarian or that you're using as an author to make sure that you're covering a real wide variety of topics?
So, yeah, I mean, it's a huge responsibility to write for children and a huge responsibility to teach, of course. I think you have to, as I said, respect them as people, respect their diverse perspectives, and you're letting them discover their own meaning from your book, right? Being didactic is not the way to go. So when you're choosing books for children, you're choosing books that are going to open them up, right? Open them to new experiences, and obviously some comforting experiences too, and guide them through the ones that might be new and maybe a little bit challenging. And think about, as they turn each page, how are they feeling? Like, you're checking in with them, right? As a read aloud, you're always checking in. What do you think is going to happen? How are you feeling? Do you think this is going to turn out okay? You have these children in front of you, and you have to be cognizant of their needs and their wants. And if they're uncomfortable with anything, then you have to address that right away. You also have to give them a wide variety of choices, right? So if you're doing whatever topic you're trying to introduce, you have lots and lots of books for them, and they can choose.
So then the last bit here, we're gonna sum up by encouraging people to connect with you on your socials or go to your website. What are the best ways for our listeners to connect with you?
Okay, so there's lots of information on my website at lisarogerswrites.com. Lots of blog posts, a few video interviews. And if you sign up for my newsletter, you'll automatically get an activity kit for Beautiful Noise, which is really fun to use. Kids can make their own sound shapes, which is really fun. And I'm happy to interact with anybody on Blue Sky and Instagram, and that's where I am. And all my events are listed on my website too. So hope to connect with people that way.